Picture this. You wake up on Christmas morning 1975, and your bedroom is so cold you can see your breath. There's actual frost inside the window. No central heating, no smartphones, no Netflix. The telly won't even start broadcasting for another 3 hours. And yet somehow that Christmas morning felt more magical than anything today's kids will ever experience. What happened? Where did it all go? Because 20 things we did every single Christmas morning have completely vanished, and most people under 40 have absolutely no idea they ever existed. Let's start with something that sounds absolutely mad to anyone born after 1990. Waking up in a bedroom so freezing that ice literally formed on the inside of your windows. Not outside, inside. Single glazed windows were standard. Central heating? That was for posh families or new build estates. Most British homes in the 70s relied on one coal fire in the living room, maybe a paraffin heater if you were lucky. Your bedroom at night was basically an icebox with wallpaper. And the thing is, nobody complained. This was just normal. This was life. Christmas morning meant waking up at 5 or 6 a.m., buzzing with excitement. And the first thing you do is scrape a little peephole in the frost with your fingernail just to see if it had snowed. You'd hold your breath, peer through that tiny circle, and hope. The frost would be thick, sometimes in beautiful patterns like ferns or feathers spreading across the glass. Even if it hadn't snowed, that ritual was part of the magic. Then you'd make the dash, barefoot usually, across freezing lino or carpet, down the hallway to the one warm room in the house, the living room. Now here's where it gets interesting. You'd burst in, ready to tear into your stocking, but the room was still dim. The fire hadn't been lit yet. The lights on the tree weren't on because nobody was awake to switch them on. There were no timers back then. And here's something that'll blow your mind. When's the last time you actually waited for something you desperately wanted without being able to distract yourself with a screen? Exactly. And here's the kicker. You'd switch on the telly, desperate for cartoons or anything festive, and all you'd get was a test card. Test card F, that girl with the clown doll and the chalkboard, just sitting there, staring at you, with that eerie robotic tone humming in the background. Some of you might not even know what a test card is. It was literally just a static image with a tone that broadcasters used to test their signal. That's what passed for entertainment before regular programming started. Because the BBC didn't start broadcasting until about 8 or 9 a.m. on Christmas morning. ITV was the same. There was nothing to watch. No streaming services, no DVDs, no VHS tapes for most families until the early 80s. If you wanted entertainment, you waited. So what did you do? You sat there in the cold half-light, clutching your stocking, maybe nibbling a tangerine, just waiting. And the weird thing, that waiting made it better. The anticipation built. Every minute felt like an hour. You'd stare at the clock on the mantelpiece, willing the hands to move faster. You'd listen for footsteps upstairs. You'd count the baubles on the tree. You'd rearrange your stocking, trying to guess what was inside by feeling through the fabric. Modern kids will never understand that kind of waiting, that kind of desperate, delicious anticipation where there's literally nothing else to do but sit with your excitement and let it build and build until you think you might explode. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before the chaos of opening presents began, there was a whole soundtrack to Christmas morning that's completely disappeared. While you waited for the grown-ups to wake up, you'd hear sounds that don't exist anymore. The Pop Man's electric milk float humming down the street at 6 a.m., delivering extra pints in glass bottles. That tiny electric whir mixed with the clink, clink, clink of glass. Even on Christmas morning, he'd do his rounds, because people needed milk for their tea, their cereal, their trifle later. And honestly, try explaining to a teenager today that someone used to deliver milk to your doorstep in reusable glass bottles and watch their brain short circuit. The milk would be freezing cold. Sometimes, if it was cold enough, the cream would push the foil cap up on top of the bottle, forming a little frozen mushroom. You'd bring the bottles in from the doorstep and they'd be so cold they'd almost stick to your fingers. That was another ritual. Fetching the milk on Christmas morning, seeing your breath in clouds in the early dawn light. Then you'd hear Dad coming downstairs, probably muttering about the cold. And the first job was always the same. Light the coal fire. Not flick a switch, not turn a dial, Build a fire. Scrunch up newspaper, usually yesterday's paper, maybe the Christmas Eve edition with the TV listings already marked up. Layer it with kindling, small sticks, maybe bits of broken up orange crates if that had been to the market. Arrange the coal just right, starting with smaller pieces, building up to the big lumps. Strike a match, hold it to the paper, watch it catch, and then wait. Sometimes 10-15 minutes for it to catch properly and start throwing real heat. The smell of coal smoke, that slightly sulfurous tang, mixed with the scent of the paraffin heater Mom might wheel in from the hallway. Some of you might not even know what paraffin is. It's a liquid fuel, and the heaters look like tall metal cylinders with a grill on top. They kicked out serious heat, but also had a very distinctive smell, sort of sweet and chemical at the same time. That combination, coal, paraffin, pine from the tree, that was the smell of Christmas morning. You can't buy that in a Yankee Candle. And before you ask, yes, paraffin heaters were absolutely a fire hazard, and yes, they probably gave off fumes that would be banned today. But somehow we all survived. Health and safety was more of a suggestion than a rule back then. Once the fire was going, the room slowly came alive. The heat spread, but not evenly. You'd be roasting on the side facing the fire and still freezing on the other side. The lights went on the tree, those big chunky bulbs that actually got hot enough to burn you if you touched them. The room would start to glow. Condensation would form on the windows as the warm air hit the cold glass. And finally, you were allowed to open your stocking. But before we get to that, there's something else that defined Christmas morning: the wireless. Not the Wi-Fi kind, the radio. Families would have Radio 4 on in the background, or maybe Radio 2. There'd be Christmas carols between the programming, special holiday shows, the shipping forecast with its poetic litany of sea areas, Viking, North Utshire, South Utshire, 40s, Cromarty, Forth. Even if you didn't understand what it meant, it was just there, part of the fabric of the day. And speaking of things that were just there, the Christmas tree was different too. Real trees, obviously, but they weren't the perfect pre-trimmed Norwegian spruces you get now. They were wonky, lopsided, sometimes half bald on one side, which you'd turn toward the wall. They dropped needles constantly, covering the floor in a carpet of green that would stick to your socks and get trodden through the house. The decorations were a mix of ancient baubles, some dating back to your grandparents' childhoods, hand-me-downs that were more precious because of their age, glass ornaments that were genuinely fragile. Drop one and it would shatter into 1,000 pieces. Tinsel that was actual metal, thin strips of aluminum that tarnished and crinkled and never looked quite right, but was used year after year anyway. And angel hair. Does anyone remember angel hair? That spun glass stuff that was supposed to look like snow? It was basically fiberglass, incredibly itchy, probably carcinogenic, and absolutely everywhere. You drape it over branches and inevitably get tiny shards of it embedded in your hands that would itch for days. But it looked magical. In the dim morning light with the fire crackling and the fairy lights glowing, that tree looked like something from a fairy tale. Right, stockings. Let's talk about what was actually inside them. But stockings weren't what they are now. Forget iPads and designer trainers. Forget gift cards and AirPods. A 70s stocking was an actual stocking. Sometimes one of Dad's work socks, the thick gray or brown ones he wore with his work boots, stuffed with small practical things. An orange or tangerine in the toe, always. That was non-negotiable. The weight of it stretched the sock, and you could feel it when you picked up the stocking, this solid, round weight at the bottom. A handful of whole nuts still in their shells, hazelnuts, Brazils, walnuts, almonds, a sugar mouse, pink or white with string for a tail. Which, quick question, when's the last time you saw an actual sugar mouse in real life? Not online, in a shop. Exactly. They've gone the way of Spam fritters and outside toilets. Maybe a yo-yo, a pack of jacks, a coloring book, a few chocolate coins and gold foil. Maybe a puzzle, one of those sliding tile ones that were impossible to solve. A spinning top, a small notepad, a pencil with a rubber on the end. Nothing expensive, nothing electronic, nothing that needed batteries. The tangerines came in those red net bags with the little wooden toggle at the top. You'd peel one and the smell would fill the room, sharp, citrusy, fresh. That scent is gone from modern Christmases. Clementines don't smell the same. They just don't. Something about the variety, the way they were grown, the time of year they were picked, it's changed. That specific tang of a Christmas tangerine has vanished into history. And the nuts? You couldn't just crack them open with your hands. You needed the nutcrackers. Heavy, metal, slightly terrifying-looking devices that required actual effort to use. They looked a bit like pliers, with ridged jaws designed to grip the shell. You'd wedge a walnut between the jaws, squeeze with both hands, really put your back into it, and hope it didn't shoot across the room when it cracked. There was a technique to it. Squeeze too hard and you'd pulverize the nut inside along with the shell. Not hard enough and nothing would happen. Brazil nuts were the worst. Those things were like trying to crack granite. And speaking of things that required actual physical effort, remember when toys didn't come with batteries included and you had to raid the kitchen drawer hoping Dad had spares? Then you discover they needed weird sizes like PP3 or C batteries that nobody ever had. But it was part of the ritual. You earned that nut. You worked for it. And because of that, it tasted better. There'd be shell fragments everywhere, on the carpet and the cracks between the sofa cushions, ground into the rug, finding walnut shells in random corners of the living room well into January. Mom would complain, but not really. It was just part of Christmas. Now here's where the morning gets properly British. While you're sitting there surrounded by torn stocking wrapping and nutshells, Mom or Dad would fetch the Radio Times and the TV Times. Two separate magazines, one for BBC, one for ITV, published weekly, absolutely essential. If you wanted to know what was on television, you needed one of these. There was no electronic program guide, no scrolling through menus. You had a magazine or you had nothing. Christmas editions were thick as books with special color covers, usually something festive. Santa, snowman, famous TV personalities in Christmas jumpers, and families would sit together flipping through them, planning the entire day around what was on telly. Right, Queen's speech at 3, then it's the Morecambe and Wise Christmas special at 8. We'll have to have dinner finished by 7:30. What time's the Bond film on? Everything revolved around the TV schedule because there was no pause button, no recording it for later. Well, not until video recorders became affordable in the early 80s, and even then they were clunky, expensive, needed a special antenna adapter, and needed a university degree to program. You'd have to set the timer manually, make sure you had a blank tape, hope the tape didn't jam or get eaten by the machine. Most people couldn't be bothered. If you missed it, forever. So the Radio Times wasn't just a magazine, it was the blueprint for Christmas Day. You'd circle programs in pen, make notes in the margins, argue about what to watch when different family members wanted different things. And since most families only had one TV in the living room, those arguments mattered. There was no watching something else on your laptop or phone. One TV, one choice. Democracy or dictatorship depending on your family. And here's something modern kids wouldn't believe. Channels actually stopped broadcasting at night. They'd play the national anthem around midnight and then just stop. The screen would go black or show a test card. Nothing. Until breakfast time the next day. The idea that you could watch television 24 hours a day would have seemed insane. Once you demolished your stocking and planned the TV schedule like military strategists preparing for D-Day, it was time for the main event, the presents under the tree. But even this was different, the whole ritual of it. Wrapping paper was expensive, so people used it sparingly, not layers and layers like now. One sheet per present, carefully folded, each crease sharp and precise. Some families even ironed and reused it year after year. Mom would carefully unpeel it, fold it flat, store it in a drawer for next Christmas. Sellotape was also treated like gold. Mom would carefully unpick it, trying not to tear the paper underneath, muttering under her breath about waste if you ripped through it. And did your family ever have a good room that nobody was allowed in except Christmases and funerals? Yeah, that was real. The front room with the settee covered in plastic, the carpet that nobody walked on, the ornaments that nobody touched. Christmas was one of the few days you were actually allowed in there, but we'll come back to that. The presents themselves were different too. Practical things, mostly. New pajamas, socks, a jumper knitted by Gran, slippers, a book, and not necessarily one you'd ask for, just one the adults thought you should read. Maybe a board game, Monopoly, Cluedo, Buckaroo, maybe a toy, but nothing extravagant. And once everything was opened, all that wrapping paper didn't go in the bin. It went in the fire. You'd scrunch it up, toss it onto the coal, and watch it flare up in brilliant colors, blues, greens, golds, before disintegrating into ash. The foil wrapping would burn in strange rainbow colors. The paper would curl and blacken and vanish in seconds. It was weirdly satisfying, mesmerizing actually. You'd stand there, feeding paper into the fire, watching each piece catch and flare and disappear, the heat on your face making your cheeks sting. Dangerous, probably, definitely a fire hazard, but absolutely normal. Then came the part that separated the children from the adults, building your new toy. Because nothing came pre-assembled, nothing came ready to play with. Everything required work. If you got an Airfix model kit, a Spitfire, a Lancaster bomber, a tank, a ship, HMS Victory maybe, you were in for hours of work. The box would have these amazing paintings on the front, dramatic battle scenes, planes swooping through clouds, ships on stormy seas. You'd open it up, and inside would be dozens of tiny plastic pieces still attached to sprues, those frames that hold all the parts. You'd need to clip each piece out carefully with nail clippers or a craft knife if you were old enough to be trusted with one. Instructions printed in baffling diagrams with exploded views and part numbers. No words, just pictures. You had to figure it out yourself, matching tiny numbers stamped on pieces to tiny numbers in the instruction booklet. And the glue. Oh, the glue. That poly cement in the little tube that smelled so strong it could strip paint. It would come in an orange tube with a needle-fine nozzle that would always get blocked, and you'd have to poke it clear with a pin. You'd squeeze out a tiny blob onto the edge of a piece, stick two pieces together, hold them for 30 seconds while your fingers went numb from staying still, and hope they didn't fall apart when you let go. The fumes were incredible. Imagine trying to make Gen Z sit still for 3 hours building a model without checking their phone. They'd have a breakdown, sweet and chemical and absolutely everywhere. By the time you finished, you were lightheaded, slightly dizzy, probably a bit high from the fumes if we're being honest. Your fingers were glued together. There'd be strings of hardened glue connecting your fingertips like spider webs. But you'd made it yourself, with your own hands. And when it was done, even if the wings were wonky and there were glue smears everywhere and some of the decals were on crooked, it was yours. You built it. That mattered. Mechano was the same. Metal strips and plates with holes in them, nuts and bolts, wheels, gears. You'd built cranes, cars, bridges. Your fingers would ache from turning tiny nuts with tiny spanners, but you were learning, engineering, problem solving, patience. Or maybe you got spirograph, those plastic wheels with teeth that you'd slot into a ring and trace around with a biro, creating these intricate geometric patterns. You'd spend hours on one drawing, and inevitably the pen would slip or the wheel would jump, and you'd have to start again. But when you got it right, when you completed a full circle and the pattern closed perfectly, it felt like magic. These toys required time, concentration, commitment. You couldn't just switch them on and be instantly entertained, and that was the point. While the kids were building models or playing with their new toys, carefully, because if you broke something on Christmas morning, that was it, there was no replacement, something else was happening in the kitchen. Mom was making her Christmas morning drink. Not tea, not coffee, a snowball. Advocat, that thick custard yellow liqueur that looked like something you'd pour over a dessert, topped up with fizzy lemonade, served in a proper glass, maybe one of the good glasses from the cabinet in the front room. Sometimes with a little paper umbrella if you were fancy, or a glacé cherry on a cocktail stick. It was sickly sweet, tasted like alcoholic custard, thick enough that you could almost chew it. And you'd struggle to even find Advocat in most supermarkets today, which tells you everything about how completely a tradition can just vanish. It was the Christmas morning drink. Every mom drank one. Every single one. Usually around 11 a.m. while peeling mountains of potatoes or basting the turkey. Dad might have a beer, a brown ale probably, or a whiskey if it was after midday. But Mom's snowball was as much a part of Christmas as the tree or the turkey. And now it's gone, completely. You ask anyone under 30 what a snowball is, and they'll think you're talking about a fight in the playground. The kitchen itself was different on Christmas morning. It was chaos, but organized chaos. The turkey would be in the oven, taking up every available inch of space, which meant everything else had to be timed perfectly around it. Roast potatoes, parsnips, Brussels sprouts, carrots, stuffing, bread sauce, cranberry sauce, everything from scratch. Nothing from a jar unless it was something exotic like cranberry sauce, and even then, Mom probably made her own. The kitchen would be sweltering, absolutely roasting, because the oven had been on since about 8 a.m. and would stay on until dinner was served. Steam would be pouring off saucepans, the windows would be fogged up with condensation, Mom would be red-faced, hair stuck to her forehead, apron on, juggling 6 different things at once, and nobody really helped. Not really. Dad would offer half-heartedly and be shooed away. The kids were told to stay out. This was Mom's domain, and she ruled it alone. Looking back, it seems mad, unfair, but that's how it was. By midday, something shifted. The chaotic, pajama-clad excitement of the morning gave way to something more formal, because you had to get changed, not into more comfortable clothes, into your good clothes. This was non-negotiable. Christmas dinner was an occasion, and you dressed appropriately. For boys, that meant itchy trousers. Proper trousers, not jeans. A proper shirt with a collar, not a t-shirt. Maybe even a tie if your family was traditional. A jumper, probably knitted by Gran, usually in some unfortunate color combination. Shoes, not trainers. Your hair combed flat with water or bridal cream. For girls, a dress, often velvet, often in maroon or navy or dark green, often with a collar that felt like a cheese grater against your neck. White tights that would inevitably get a hole in them before the day was done, black shoes that pinched, hair brushed then clipped back with slides or ribbons. Nobody wanted to get changed. You were comfortable. You were warm. You'd been playing happily in your pajamas or your new Christmas clothes, the soft new pajamas or the tracksuit you'd got as a present. But Christmas dinner wasn't something you ate in your pajamas. It was an event, a formal occasion, and you dressed accordingly. There was a strange in-between period then. You were dressed up with nowhere to go, too smart to carry on playing, too early for dinner, so you'd sit carefully, trying not to get your good clothes dirty. Maybe you'd read your new book, maybe you'd play a board game quietly, maybe you'd just sit and watch whatever was on telly waiting. And that event, that formal occasion, was entirely structured around one thing: the Queen's speech at 3 p.m. Every house, every family stopped what they were doing at 3 o'clock, sat down in front of the telly, and watched the Queen deliver her annual address. Not because anyone particularly wanted to. Imagine trying to make today's kids sit through 10 minutes of formal speech with no phones, no pausing, no skipping ahead to the interesting bits, because there were no interesting bits, but because it was simply what you did. The channels literally stopped all other programming. BBC and ITV both show it. There was no alternative, no choice. You could turn the telly off, but that would be seen as vaguely treasonous. So you watched. Just the Queen sitting in a tastefully decorated room somewhere in a palace, Buckingham or Windsor, you never quite knew, wearing a nice dress and some substantial jewelry, talking about the Commonwealth and family values and reflecting on the year for 10 minutes. And you watched. In silence, because it was Christmas, because it was the Queen, because that's what people did. Looking back, it seems bizarre, this compulsory national moment of sitting still and paying attention to a formal speech. But it marked something. It was a shared experience. Everyone in the country was doing the same thing at the same time. There was something powerful about that, even if we didn't appreciate it then. After the Queen's speech, dinner would be served, the climax of the whole day. But we're not quite there yet. But here's the thing about all of these traditions. They weren't planned. Nobody sat down and decided, right, we're going to make Christmas morning about freezing bedrooms and test cards and nutcrackers and snowballs and getting changed into uncomfortable clothes. It just was. These rituals emerged from the world people lived in, a world of scarcity, of limited choice, of making do with what you had. A world where you couldn't just order anything online and have it arrive the next day in fancy packaging, where entertainment was rationed, finite, precious, where warmth was something you had to create, not just expect, where convenience wasn't the default setting. And because of that, Christmas morning felt earned. You'd waited in the cold, literally shivering for the house to warm up and the day to begin. You'd sat through dead air on the television, through test cards and silence, building anticipation. You'd cracked your own nuts with your own hands, working for your reward. You'd built your own toys, spending hours on something that would probably break or get lost within a few months, but felt precious in the moment. You'd planned your day around a TV schedule you couldn't control, negotiating and compromising with family members. And here's something nobody talks about. Shared inconvenience created shared experience in a way convenience never can. You'd put on clothes you hated because the occasion demanded it. You'd sat through a formal royal address because it was tradition. You'd waited for dinner to be served, smelling it cook for hours, your hunger building. By the time dinner was served and the Queen's speech ended and the fire was roaring and the quality street tin was open and the arguments about which chocolate was best began, you'd arrived at Christmas. You hadn't just woken up to it and scrolled through it while half watching a Marvel film in your pants. You'd lived it, hour by hour, ritual by ritual. Each small tradition was a stepping stone, leading you through the day. The scraped frost on the window, the test card, the milk float, the lighting of the fire, the stocking, the nuts, the radio times, the wrapping paper burning, the model glue, the snowball, the getting changed, the Queen's speech. And that's what's vanished. Not just the sugar mice and the paraffin heaters and the test card and the Airfix kits and the snowballs, but the structure, the shared experience, the communal anticipation, the sense that everyone was moving through the same day and roughly the same way, at the same pace. Modern Christmases are easier, warmer, more convenient in every possible way. You can watch what you want when you want. You can stay warm with the touch of a button. You can order presents online and have them arrive wrapped. You can eat whatever you fancy because the shops are open and delivery services run all day. You can wear whatever's comfortable. But they're also faster, more disposable, more individualized, less anchored. The frost on the inside of the window wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a marker, a boundary between the ordinary and the special. The scraping of it was a ritual that said today is different. The smell of coal smoke wasn't just a smell, it was a signal that the house was waking up, that warmth was coming, that the day was beginning properly. The weight of the nutcracker in your hand wasn't just about getting to the nut, it was about earning it, about the physical reality of Christmas being something you participated in, not something that happened to you. The flare of wrapping paper in the fire wasn't just about disposal, it was about transformation, about seeing the evidence of gifts given and received turned into light and heat and then nothing, a kind of magic. These weren't just details. They were the entire point, because Christmas wasn't something you consumed, it was something you did, something you participated in, something that required your presence, your attention, your effort. And maybe that's why it felt more magical, not because it was objectively better, objectively being cold is rubbish and modern central heating is a blessing, but because you had to work for it, you had to wait for it, you had to be present for it. There was no skipping ahead, no pausing, no doing something else at the same time. Christmas morning demanded your full attention because there were no alternatives, no escape routes, no easy outs. You were there, fully, completely, with your family in that cold house, with that coal fire, with those simple presents, with that shared schedule, with those uncomfortable clothes, with that formal speech, with all of it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it special. Not the things themselves, but the being there, the being together, the moving through the day in sync, step by step, ritual by ritual. The modern world has given us control, choice, convenience, comfort, but it's taken something too. That sense of shared time, shared inconvenience, shared waiting, shared anticipation.
Because when everyone has the same limitations, those limitations create connection. When everyone's watching the same 3 channels, you have something to talk about. When everyone's cold, you all appreciate the fire together. When everyone's waiting, you wait together. Remove the limitations, and you remove the connection. Everyone in their own room, on their own device, watching their own thing, comfortable in their own way. Better, maybe, probably, obviously in practical terms, but different, fundamentally different. And once you've lost something, you can't get it back. You can't recreate scarcity once you've experienced abundance. You can't manufacture anticipation once you've had instant gratification. You can't force shared experience once individual choice is available. Those Christmas mornings are gone. Not just the specific details, but the whole structure of them, the whole feeling of them. And nobody planned it, nobody decided it. It just happened, gradually, one innovation at a time, one convenience at a time. Each change making life slightly better, slightly easier, slightly more comfortable, until one day you wake up and realize that an entire way of being has vanished.
And here's the strangest part. None of this was considered special at the time. It was just normal, just Christmas, just what everyone did. Kids complained about the cold and the waiting and the itchy clothes and having to sit through the Queen's speech. Moms complained about doing all the cooking. Dads complained about the cost of it all. Everyone complained about something. But now, trying to explain it to someone who grew up with Netflix and Amazon Prime and central heating and smartphones feels like describing life on another planet. Which means, in another 40 years, the Christmases we're having right now, the ones that feel so normal, so unremarkable, the ones with the instant entertainment and the online shopping and the constant connectivity, will sound just as alien to the next generation. And they'll sit there listening to us ramble on about things like physical DVDs and having to actually go to a shop, and what it was like before AI could generate a perfect Christmas dinner recommendation based on your dietary preferences. And they'll look at us the same way we look at our parents and grandparents now, with that mixture of affection and incomprehension, thinking how primitive it all sounds, how quaint, how impossibly difficult. And they'll be right, but they'll also be missing something important that they can't quite name, the same way we're missing something we can't quite name. And the question nobody seems to be asking is, which of today's Christmas traditions are already quietly vanishing without anyone noticing?